In this video, we'll be reading about the Internet Information Services. This is basically just a server. I'm more familiar with Apache, so I thought I'd read this Wikipedia article. And it's actually so large that this video will just do features. And then in the following video, we can do extensions and usages, and finally, security. To start, here is a nice little image of the Manager console. This is something created by Microsoft, as you see here, so of course they have this GUI-ness. And I always find it interesting to look at the icons they choose. They got like a little notebook for logging. You can add and delete a document for request filtering. Over here is MIME types with a little music note. But yeah, just a lot of typical things that a web server will need to deal with. Now this Internet Information Services, which is abbreviated IIS, was launched in 1995. It was written in C++. It's intended for the Windows NT operating system. As we go down here, it says it is formerly known as the Internet Information Server, but apparently it changed its name to the Internet Information Services. But regardless, this IIS is an extensible web server created by Microsoft for use with the Windows NT family. IIS supports HTTP, the file transfer protocol, and then the file transfer security protocol. You got SMTP and NNTP. And I'm not too familiar with NNTP, so I'm going to turn this into a question. So IIS supports NNTP, which stands for Network News Transfer Protocol. And now, what type of articles are being transported via this protocol? And the answer is Usenet articles. You might refer to them as net news. But moving on, it has been an integral part of the Windows NT family since Windows NT 4.0, though it may be absent from some editions. For example, Windows XP Home Edition. And of course, the server is not active by default. So yeah, you see all the history here. Maybe I'll make a fourth video about the history. I would need a reason to really get into IIS. So without that reason, I might just stick with these three. Starting with the first one right here, features. So it looks like we're on version 6.0 and higher support the following authentication mechanisms. So you can authenticate anonymously. You can have just some basic access authentication. I imagine that is exactly what it sounds like. You'll have digest access authentication, integrated Windows authentication, UNC, .NET passport authentication, which was removed in Windows Server 2008 and IIS 7.0. So I wonder if there was some sort of security flaw with this. That'd be a fun side project to research. And then the last one is certificate authentication. So my question is, which of the 7 authentication methods would you want to research more on first? So if I was to start anywhere, I actually wouldn't start with this one. I feel good about certificate authentication, so I don't need that at all. Maybe you as a listener would just say like I'd start at the top, even though there's no link right here, so that might be a real big reason to go ahead and look into that first. That way you can come to Wikipedia here and edit this and make it a link, make a new page all about anonymous authentication. But the first one I would want to do more research on is UNC. I doubt that stands for the University of Northern Colorado or North Carolina. I'm curious to find out what UNC stands for. Alright, IIS 7.0 has a modular architecture. Modules, also called extensions, can be added or removed individually so that only modules required for specific functionality have to be installed. IIS 7 includes native modules as part of the full installation, and these modules are individual features that the server uses to process requests and include the following. Security modules. These are used to perform many tasks related to security in the request processing pipeline, such as specifying authentication schemes, performing URL authorization, and filtering requests. So I wrote what is one thing the security module does for IIS. You could choose any of these three. It specifies which type of authentication scheme you're going to use in order to get to that server. It'll also perform URL authorization. So it sounds like it does some filtering here. Oh, and then that's the third one. It says filtering requests. Maybe those two shouldn't be separate, but I understand why they would want to emphasize maybe this particular one. Alright, on to content modules. These are used to perform tasks related to content in the request processing pipeline, such as processing requests for static files, returning a default page when a client does not specify a resource in a request, and listing the contents of a directory. So that's kind of cool. When I read this particular one, I'm thinking about those like unique default pages that pop up when maybe their server is down or a particular file is not available. I'm thinking about that default page GitHub gives you. You might be remembering this whole under construction kind of default page many websites use. But there you go, there's not too much about the content module, so I'm not going to write any questions on it. Let's go to compression modules. These are used to perform tasks related to compression in request processing pipeline, such as compressing responses, applying the gzip compression transfer coding to responses, and performing pre-compression of static content. So I wrote, what type of compression does the IIS compression module seem to use by default? By default, it looks like gzip. Now we move to our caching modules. These are used to perform tasks related to caching in the request processing pipeline, such as storing processed information in memory on the server and using cached content in subsequent requests for the same resource. So I ask, why would caching be helpful for a server services application like IIS? It'd be helpful because if a lot of people are accessing the exact same resource, the exact same service, if it is in memory already, that certainly should improve the speed that these clients are experiencing when accessing this server. Now our last module here is the Logging and Diagnostics module. This is used to perform tasks related to logging and diagnostics in the request processing pipeline. I'm like, of course it is. Note to self, I need to edit this wiki page to get rid of that verbosity. But while we're here, let's go and ask the question, what is the request processing pipeline? And since we keep reading this word in each of the modules, I think we can come to the conclusion that the pipeline is the modules themselves, all the steps that the whole requesting of a service and the receiving of a service will be going through. This module being the very last one, it looks like. And this entire thing is a very broken paragraph. We have this really hard to read language, such as passing information and processing status to HTTP period, and then lowercase sys for logging, reporting events, and tracking requests currently executing in worker processes. Maybe the simple fix is to make this a comma. Yeah, if you're familiar with logging, that's what IIS is doing. So I ask what type of information can be logged, and so any of the things said at the end of that paragraph will work. Now in IIS 7.5, there are some enhanced security features such as client certificate mapping, IP security, request filtering, and URL authorization. Authentication changed slightly between 6.0 and 7, most notably in that the anonymous user, which was named _their machine name, is a built-in account in Vista and future operating systems and named IUSR. Well, that period should be inside the quote right there. But anyway, notably, in 7, each authentication mechanism is isolated into its own module and can be installed or uninstalled. And I'd really love to see an example of what they're talking about there. But let's move to 8.0. This offers new features targeted at performance and easier administration. So the question, what does IIS 8.0 improve? You could say performance and ease of administration. How do they do that? Well, application initialization. It's a tough word for me to say. This is a feature that allows an administrator to configure certain applications to start automatically. Yay, we love automation. This will reduce the wait time experienced by users who access the site for the first time after a server reboot. The next feature is the splash page during application initialization, so the administrator can configure a splash page to be displayed to the site visitor during an application initialization. A lot of big words there to describe the showing of a splash page. Now ASP.NET 4.5 support with IIS 8.0, this is included by default, and IIS also offers several configuration options for running it side by side with ASP.NET 3.5. And now that I see this next one is about centralized SSL certificate support, I'm going back to the top and I'm thinking about the introduction paragraph right here, where they say these new features are all about performance and easier administration. So this is a security thing. Let's see how it relates to performance or ease of administration. Usually things that are easy are not necessarily secure. I mean, they say complexity is the enemy of security. I also know security can give you a performance hit, but obviously worth it usually. But let's read. A feature that makes managing certificates easier by allowing the administrator to store and access the certificates on a file share. So I wonder how you guys feel about a question like this, but I'm asking what topics are being discussed when I Google centralized SSL certificates Stack Exchange. Whether Google takes me to maybe a server fault Q&A or power user or whatever, I'm just curious to look more into that. Okay, almost done here. This is about multi-core scaling on Numa hardware. So this is cool because it's low level, and I love low level. I don't totally remember what Numa stands for, other than the A is for architecture and the U is for uniform. Good thing I looked it up just now, because the N is super important for my memory to remember because it's non-uniform memory access. I remember reading that in the paper by a Red Hat employee about what every programmer should know about memory. Well, anyways, 8.0 provides several configuration options that optimize performance on systems that run on Numa, such as running several worker processes under one application pool and using soft or hard affinity and more. So I have no idea what that means. There is no link right there. So I'm just going to ask, what is hard affinity? Okay, the next one is very small Websocket protocol support. So I don't know anything about that. I'm going to ask the question, is there an RFC about the Websocket protocol? If so, what number is it? Okay, and then the next feature is the server name indication, SNI. It's an extension to Transport Layer Security, TLS, right? Which allows binding of multiple websites with different host names to one IP address, similar to how host headers are used for non-SSL sites. So is this saying this server does DNS? And when would we have multiple websites with different host names that go to the same IP address? Or at least I wonder how common that is. Well, our next feature is dynamic IP address restrictions. This is a feature that enables an administrator to dynamically block IPs or IP ranges that hit the server with a large number of requests. So it's like automatic DDoS mitigation using the concept of filtering. Our last feature for 8.0 is CPU throttling, a set of controls that allow the server administrator to control CPU usage by each application pool in order to optimize performance in a multi-tenant environment. So if you want to optimize the access of a particular service, you can use that. Okay, I'll read very quickly through 8.5 because the video is running a little longer than I wanted, but at the end of that, we'll save this IIS Express and then the extensions feature for the next video. So back at the top here, 8.5 has several improvements related to performance in large-scale scenarios, such as those used by commercial hosting providers and Microsoft's own cloud offerings. It also has several added features related to logging and troubleshooting. Okay, so 8.5 is very cloud-related, it sounds like. Alright, the first one is idle worker process pageout. This is a function to suspend idle site to reduce the memory footprint of idle sites. Next is dynamic site activation. This is a feature that registers listing queues only to sites that have received requests. I meant to say listening queues, my bad. Next we have enhanced logging. This is a feature to allow collection of server variables, request headers, and response headers in the IIS logs. So I'm new at learning a lot of this, that's why I'm reading it out to you guys. I'm curious to know how enhanced logging is useful to anyone. That seems like some information that just would clog up your storage. But if storage is cheap, who cares? Okay, Etw Logging. This ETW provider, which allows collecting real-time logs using various event tracing tool. Should it say tools as in plural? Alright, our very last one, automatic certificate rebind. This is a feature that detects when a site certificate has been renewed and automatically rebinds a site to it. Okay, so more automation, which is a good thing. Well, we got 14 questions. I hope this is helpful in your introduction to what IIS is.